Well, hey there, everybody. My name is Jarrod Alberich, the art sale artist, and I want to welcome you to another episode of New to Me. This is the show where I go on social media, usually Twitter, and I put out there, hey, I'd like to see a movie I've never seen before. And I usually put some kind of parameter around it. And last time I said 80s, and Doodle Bags threw me Night of the Comet, which was the last episode. And before I could send a new one out with a new parameter, my main man Chris here threw in Southern Comfort, and I just couldn't say no to that. But before we get to that, let's meet our guest. I want to welcome you. We call you Blackbelt Chris around the network, but he's Christopher Lee, and well, not the Christopher Lee, a Christopher.
I get that a lot, though. It's usually the older, older people. I shouldn't say older. I mean, I'm getting up there.
Yeah, we are those people, Chris.
65, 70-year-old range, 80-year-old range. They'll see my name. Like, you do know who Christopher Lee is? I'm like, well, yeah. It's only one of my favorite Bond films.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us here, Chris. So, like I said, I put out their parameter. I said 80s film. My buddy Mike the Doodle Bags came in, said Night of the Comet. We talked about that. And right after that, Chris comes in the comments and he's like, Southern Comfort. And I was like, hadn't heard of it. So I went and acquired it, put it on my Plex server, gave it a watch. And man, I really enjoyed it. So let's start with some questions to Chris. Chris, you saw my tweet about 80s movies that I probably haven't seen. And this is, I mean, you came pretty quick. Like it was like Doodle Bags and then Chris, like bam, bam. Why? Why'd you pick this?
I saw your tweet and I was like, all right, I know Jarrod's taste in movies here. And I know some of the things he's seen. I'm like, I'm going to go out on a limb. And I started Googling. I'm like, all right, 80s movies, just, oddball 80s movies. And this one popped up and I looked at it and I'm like, I've never heard of this. I'm like, oh my God, it's got Powers Booth, Keith Carradine, and Fred Ward. I'm like, I have never seen this, but I'm going to recommend it anyway, just on those parameters alone.
You betrayed me. You recommended a movie you hadn't even seen. Oh my god, he got me.
I even said that though.
Oh, I don't really pay enough attention.
And I watched it, I think later that afternoon or later that week, and I'm like, this is great.
Okay, it's fair to share with the audience that Chris and I have a fun and interesting relationship on Twitter. First of all, I got to know Chris through our podcast, the podcast I do with my brother, Action Film Face Off. I think that's kind of how we kind of originally bonded. And then plus I'm always tweeting whatever movie I'm watching. And I watch a lot of obscure B-level crap, which is also Chris's wheelhouse. Okay. We both love like bad movies that are just charmingly awesome. So when you gave me Southern Comfort and I didn't read like I should have, I figured, okay, he's seen this one. Is it going to fit into that vein? Is it going to be like a cheesy 80s thing? But this is a very serious film.
Yeah. Well, and especially when I found out who, I did a little more digging and I found out who directed, like, oh my God, this is the guy that did The Warriors. And he had a hand in Another 48 Hours.
Yes.
Alien 3, Aliens, Tales from the Crypt, Streets of Fire, Red Heat. This guy's got quite the pedigree.
Yes, that is definitely one of the things I picked up on as well as I was watching this. So yeah, it's a cool film. For those of you who haven't seen it, now I'm quite certain that Chris and I are going to spoil this 40-year-old movie.
Yes.
But I will give you a quick plot rundown. This is basically a group of people from the Louisiana National Guard, a group of soldiers from the Louisiana National Guard who take their National Guard job more seriously than any National Guardsman I've ever met in my entire life.
You can speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, and all my military, and that is no slight on the Guard. I know plenty of wonderful people from the Guard. I've served with people. I was deployed with people in Iraq who were from the Guard. They're wonderful people, but these people in this movie are dedicated. Okay, so they're dedicated to their maneuvers. So they're out practicing their maneuvers in the backwoods swamps of Louisiana. They get a little bit lost because terrain has changed, as swamps do. They decide to maybe take a little shortcut because they find some canoes. They basically find like a little hunting center where people are bringing their game and all that. And there's some canoes there. And they thought, well, we can save some time if we take the canoes. They have a debate about whether or not it's right or wrong. They end up taking them. And well, the backwoods Cajuns aren't too pleased about that. Then one of the soldiers from the group fires blank rounds at them, thinking it's funny. Cajuns don't think that's funny, and they return real fire, and that's when the fun begins. Basically, yeah, this group of soldiers that are on maneuvers in Louisiana become hunted by the Cajuns in the backwoods. And I think 9 of them go in. I think 2 of them come out. And I'll leave the rest up to our discussion, or the viewers can go watch it. So that's my summary of the film. Now, Chris, since you lied to me and told me that you'd seen it before, that's the story I'm going with. So you and I are kind of both first watchers on this. You watched it several weeks ago when the tweet came out, and then I watched it yesterday. So give me your initial thoughts from your first watch, and we'll see if they match up with mine.
From the first watch, there were a couple things that I had to go when I went back and watched it again. Like, oh, okay, now I get it. There are a few things I missed the first time around. Like, I'm like, wait, where'd they get the live rounds? Because they all went out with blanks.
Fred Ward's character always brings a box, like he snuck a box.
Yeah. What's the deal with Charlie? Powers Booth's character. Why does he not get along with the rest of them? And then watching it the second time around, it's like, oh, he's from Texas. I missed that the first time when he talked about he was from Texas.
He's the new guy. Yeah.
As I got farther into the movie, I come to find out he's a little more educated. It seems like he's a little more educated than the rest, because he said he was a chemical engineer. And I got the feeling the rest of them weren't quite, up to that level of education or work.
I found that comment, as a military man myself, a little complex. He's a chemical engineer, which means he's probably college educated, which made me wonder, like, why is he not an officer? Why he was like a private first class. There's nothing wrong with doing enlisted guard duty in your spare time at all. It's just that was an oddity to me.
Okay. I was also impressed with the cast.
Yes.
Because we had Powers Booth, Keith Carradine, Fred Ward, and then a few others. As I'm watching, like, oh man, I didn't catch that the first time around. And then I started digging into IMDb this afternoon. We had Alan Autry Bowden, who was Bubba in The Heat of the Night.
Okay.
Series. And then who is it? TK Carter, Cribs. He was in Runaway Train. And a couple of other 80s movies are some of my favorites.
Yes. The only one I really recognized was Peter Coyote. Is that his name?
Yes. I recognize that. I'm like, I know that name and I know that face. So I dug into IMDb as I was watching this afternoon. Like, oh, that's it.
What was he in? Because it's still driving me nuts.
I'd have to go back and look now.
I'll do it. I'll do it right now.
Right now, yes.
I want to say, since I'm looking it up, I don't have to look like a fool if I do say it. But I want. Okay, E.T. He was he was the E.T. guy.
That's it.
Okay.
That was one. And the one that really caught me, and I had to really look for it. Sonny Landham. Sonny Landham.
Who was he in the movie?
He was one of the hunters. He's the dude in the blue ball cap, red vest, Marty McFly vest from Back to the Future, and mustache. He's hiding behind the mustache. And he looks much younger and nowhere near as buff as he was for Predator. He
was Billy, right?
Yeah, he was Billy. He was Billy in Predator.
God dang, that
no way. And then I kept looking, and I'm like, oh, there he is. He's a lot skinnier, and he's hiding behind that stash.
That mustache just ruined the whole thing. No, but
and we get Brian James too.
I don't know that one.
He's I can't. He was in Blade Runner. He's one of the replicants in Blade Runner.
Okay,
the very first one.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I know that guy. He's like he plays like
he's in everything.
A-hole character.
Yes,
like, he almost always plays a jerk.
Yeah.
This one he played the one-armed Cajun dude.
He played the one of the one-armed hunters
who didn't speak English.
Yes.
Wink, wink.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Honestly, okay, so I'm gonna get into the movie a little bit. Honestly, so they get lost and then they start being hunted, and they actually find they capture one of these Cajun guys who says, "Oh, you don't speak English, only speaks French, backwoods French." And then I honestly thought, because without getting all too complex, it becomes a very psychological thing. Soldiers start turning on each other, and there ends up being a pretty intense knife fight between Powers Booth and Fred Ward.
Yeah, I made a note of that it's like, ooh, they get down and dirty with knife fighting. And it was a much better knife fight than Under Siege.
Good point. But what struck me is I honestly thought the end of the knife fight was going to be when the guy was yelling at him in French, and then he yells, "Kill him!"
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute. And I thought that was going to like be the where they both realized, hey, he just spoke English.
Yeah,
but
right.
They didn't
turn and look at him and go, wait a minute.
Nope, didn't stop the knife fight. And that was spoiler alert number 1, the end of Fred Ward's character.
Fred Ward, yes.
Who I was really enjoying. It was fairly timely that we do this now with his recent
I know, that's what I was thinking.
He was just great. He's great in everything. I mean, I could watch Remo Williams on constant loop. No problem.
Even as cheesy as it was, I could still watch it too.
It's gloriously wonderful.
That may be that may be one to add to the list for when my wife's out of the country for a couple of weeks to watch with my son.
Yeah, I put it on with my teenage son about a year ago, and he dug it. He was like, "Oh, this is cool." He really enjoyed it. I recently found some of the Marvel comics from that too. They did a Destroyer series, and I read some of those. Those were pretty. They only made a few, but in the 90s. Anyways, let's get back to Southern Comfort. So, I made a couple little notes, and so I made it. I was like, okay, this definitely has Deliverance vibes.
Yes.
If you've ever, it's much more obscure, but I believe Deliverance kind of kicked off this kind of genre, this kind of danger in your own backyard genre.
I think you're right.
I'm sure there's some film person out there could be like, no, actually in 1957, or, in some movie I hadn't seen. You know what? If you're like, maybe you don't speak in that voice. If you're like that, they'll put it in the comments, because I would love to go watch what you consider the beginning.
Yeah, I'd love to watch the one that actually kicked all that off.
Yeah, no joke. I won't give you a mocking voice in the future. I promise you. But so in my notes, I wrote, okay, so this is feels like Deliverance influence. And so I looked that up, 1972. And I recently watched a very obscure movie that not a lot of people know about called Rituals with Hal Holbrook. And it's from 77, and it had that vibe.
Yep. I went and watched that one after you posted it too. Like, ooh.
All right, quick aside, what'd you think of Rituals?
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
It's another one of those psychological, like you said, in your own backyard thrillers.
Yeah.
Like, wait, what the heck, man? What is going on here? Who's going to make it out alive?
There's very much a thing. I think Rituals could have stuck the landing at the end a little better, but anyway. So you get Deliverance, and you get Rituals in 77, and then along comes Southern Comfort in 1981. And they all have, you said it, that psychological vibe. This is you get invested in the characters. And one of my favorite things about it, and then I'll be happy to pass it to you for your comment, and you can start thinking of one of your favorite things, is they finally, near the last 20 minutes, 15 minutes, they kind of reach civilization with air quotes. Okay. They find this backwoods country town. And for just a split second, you're like, oh, they're safe. And then they're not safe.
Yes.
And Powers Booth plays it really well, because Keith Carradine, right? I want to say David. Yes. Keith Carradine, he feels kind of like we as the audience feel. Oh, he's safe. He's kind of dancing with someone at the party. But then Powers Booth kind of feels like the other part of how we as the audience feel like, are they really safe? And he's really watching what's happening around them. And it's getting more and more intense. There's an allegory going on right in front of our eyes, because they brought 2 pigs out for slaughter. And you're like, okay, because that's what he's thinking, because he sees the 2 ropes go up. By the way, I noticed they didn't have the no animals were harmed during the making. They killed those pigs.
I'm pretty sure they shot 2 pigs.
That was a real deal. This was before before all that.
Well, when the 2 nooses came out, I'm thinking, oh, are they in for it?
Yeah, definitely. I was like, are those nooses for those guys? Is the whole town in on it? Type of a deal. So I particularly liked that moment. I mean, I liked all of the build up to it, but I thought it was kind of a neat. You want to feel safe, like Carradine's character, but you deep down inside, even as an audience member, you're like, they ain't safe until they get to real civilization.
And Hill, and I like the way Hill shot it too, because it flipped back and forth between Carradine, Booth, Carradine, Booth, Carradine, Booth. So you got both sides of it. And one of the things I really liked was how at the beginning, all the music, you've got that nice Louisiana vibe to it, that Southern vibe to it. And you get the beauty of the swamp and all that. And they take off and start doing their thing. And then nobody dies aside from Sarge, nobody else dies in the movie until like 50 some odd minutes into the movie. So you're halfway through the movie before something else happens. You have all this tension that builds up. And then at a little more than halfway point through the movie, it all starts to go downhill for him. And the cinematography changes, the way the shots are done changes. It's none of these big sweeping, vistas or wide shots. Everything's close up now. The vibe of the music even changes, and you can tell that there's a big shift in the movie. And then they all start getting picked off one by one, either from their own stupidity or falling into the traps.
There was a fair amount of own stupidity. Like, it's kind of a study in human nature and how people react to stress and things like that. And in my day job for many, many years, and I still do it once a week, teaching leadership classes, I can't help but watch the different leadership styles. And then, once they're truly recognized leaders, see, they have the benefit of having a leader, which is Sarge. He's got the positional power and he's got the personal power. Like, they all like him and they all follow him naturally. He is a good charismatic leader, and that's Peter Coyote, I think, plays that role.
Yeah, Peter Coyote.
Once he's gone, now it gets real interesting from a leadership point of view, because you have a guy who has positional power. You have another sergeant who has positional power, but doesn't have personal influence power.
He doesn't have the influence, and you can tell it because they right off the bat, he's off. He's like, "You see these stripes?" What I'm trying to remember what he says.
Yes, he automatically relies on his position.
Yes,
and that is the first giveaway that you are not a good leader. You have to go to that, especially right off the bat.
Right off the bat.
That's and you start to get the vibe, and I like the character arc that Carradine had, because he starts out kind of a little slimy, he's procured prostitutes,
yes, I kind of got that too.
But you start to see him emerge as what we in the business call the informal leader. Like, he just has the know-how, the charisma. People tend to like him, people tend to follow him, and even Powers Booth, who's probably the smartest one out of them all, like you said, he recognizes that. And they have a nice little scene where he's like, if you decide to step up, I'd back you. And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, thanks for nominating me for the court martial." Yeah, screw you, buddy. Actually, I think he uses the F word.
He did.
But that's kind of what ends up happening, and it just adds another layer of tension, because as you watch the sergeant who's trying to use positional power, he's not a bad guy. He's doing his best, and he's not dumb.
No,
it's just he doesn't have it.
No, and at the beginning, they treat him as they're just these backwoods hillbillies, and then after Cribbs, buys it with the little punji strip, the punji stick, trap. Now all of a sudden, Sarge is like, he specifically says, "We are at war," and then he starts calling him the enemy, not just some backwoods hicks or whatever it was, they would refer to him as. There's a dynamic change there once Cribbs buys it.
There's some classic art of war stuff going on there too, because like I said, they underestimated their enemy. They didn't realize that they were in their enemy's territory. They knew the territory better than them. They lived it, they breathed it. They thought, "Hey, we're trained, we've got the equipment." They don't. And what's interesting about that is a lot of film critics and a lot of people who wax intellectual, like we're doing right now, have said, "Oh, this movie is a Vietnam allegory film. It's an allegory for Vietnam." Where Walter Hill's come straight out and said, "No, it's not." I did not know that. He came out straight by himself, and I think he said he wrote it, the first draft of it, in 76. He said, I think it took about 5 years from when he wrote to making it. And he said that was never on his mind. It was always just about overconfident people in an environment that they didn't understand. Like he straight up said, "No, it's not a Vietnam allegory." But he understands that people can't help but see it because
See it, yeah.
it is, you know, an unfamiliar environment, underestimating the enemy. I mean, they're in the right clothing.
Yeah,
You know, it's military clothing. So I thought that was fascinating. So, what else did you like about the film? You got any other highs you want to talk about?
I really loved it when they first meet Brian James, and then they're out there talking to him, and one of the guys, he goes in, then he just decides, I'm gonna make a Molotov cocktail here. I'm gonna paint a cross on my chest and blow up his cabin. I'm like, what the heck happened here?
That's what everybody's question was. Like Coach, I think they called him Coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, he basically he was the first one to start losing his grip.
That's when he starts to lose it.
Yeah. And then he loses it all the way. And now you bring me to another interesting thing. All right, spoiler alert. Near the end of the film, Coach is hanging from a rope from under a bridge. Mm-hmm. He's hung. And you never really can tell whether they hung him, the bad guys, the Cajuns, or if he hung himself. Because
what do you think?
If I had to place money, I'd say the Cajuns hung him.
Yeah.
But if you came to me and said, if Walter Hill came in my door right now and said, aha, he hung himself, I'd have been like, you got me. Like it's really a coin flip. My instinct says they hung him.
See, I'm thinking they hung him too, because by that point in the movie, he was totally out of it. He was non-responsive. Almost like catatonic.
Yeah, he was catatonic.
We're just leading him around, and he's not saying anything, not responding to anything they say. So, it's almost like he would just resign himself to whatever the hillbillies were going to do to him.
Mm-hmm. They straight up asked him, like, did you do this? And he was like, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yep.
Doesn't matter whether we did it, whether we didn't do it. He did. I tell you what, I was fair warning to those people who are watching this and haven't seen Southern Comfort. I was enjoying a delicious snack there near the end of the movie. And it is graphic with them killing and slaughtering those hogs.
Oh, yes.
Woo! And again, a great allegory. 2 hogs, 2 of them left, 2 ropes with nooses, shooting the hogs. Like I said, this was before the whole no animals were harmed. They clearly did kill 2 hogs. So that's another fair warning to those of you. If you're squeamish about that, you're going to see 2 hogs put down. I did learn something back in the day.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't remember what I was watching to or listening recently. I listened to tons of podcasts and watched tons of stuff. I got a brain full of garbage. But I did learn something back in the day, like the 70s and 80s, sort of before that, no animals were harmed during the making this film, which, by the way, kind of came about from Never Say Never Again. And if you put a pin in that, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Yes. And that was 1983. So this is right before. This is 2 years before that. The sort of the guiding parameters around, animal death, cruelty in movies was like, certainly there was people out there making films that were irresponsible and harming animals just to make their films. But sort of a higher class thing, which I think is what we have going on here with Walter Hill and his group, was it's okay to like slaughter those pigs on screen if you legitimately intend to eat them. Like, it's not a wasted, it's not for the film. And I don't know. I just got the feeling just by how they were cleaning them and skinning them. Like, I think they're legitimately going to eat these.
They're legitimately going to grill them up and feed the crew.
I honestly believe the film crew ate those pigs. And at least that's what I'm going to tell myself.
Well, part of me says they probably did, because they had one spit roasting on the fire there.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what they did to the other 2, that one that was on the fire probably had to be real.
Yeah, I tell you, I was really like in the headspace of our by this time in the film, it's basically Carradine and Booth. And I was really in their headspace, because as soon as I saw that pig on the spit, I was like, that has got to smell so good to them. They've been out for days just with sea rations.
Oh,
and
yes.
They were probably, I would have been like all up on that pig. So yeah, just a quick aside. In Never Say Never Again, Sean Connery rides a horse off of a fortress wall, and the horse and Kim Basinger all fall in the water. That's when like the animal rights people really first, like, I can't believe you let that horse off of there, and they had to be like, horse is fine, horse didn't get hurt. But that's kind of what kind of kicked off the big buzz of where you see that in films now, no animals being harmed and all that.
Gotcha.
But again, a warning to anybody who's watching this and is not seeing Southern Comfort, you are legitimately going to see two pigs get killed and slaughtered as they do in the backwoods. Yeah, as you would. So yeah. But it is very allegorical, and it has the effect that Walter Hill wanted it to have, because I was feeling it. I was like, oh, something ain't right.
Well, I'm thinking, is that going to be them next?
Exactly. So,
and then when they bug out of there, the little chase through the barns or what the buildings they had, the ending is what really got me, because you're like, are they going to make it or not?
Yeah, like each time you think one of them's finally been got, the other one kind of shows up to save them. Another fair warning, man. Powers Booth stabs a guy straight up into his crotch. I was like, oh man, that it gets a little brutal. Like, I would say, you can weigh in on this, Chris. I would say 90% of the movie is psychological, and then 10% of it is brutality, and that's kind of how I'd maybe 95 and 5. But when it gets brutal, it gets brutal.
I'd go with that, because aside from when Stookie drowns in the quicksand, I mean, everybody else kind of dies a somewhat gruesome death.
Yeah, man, that was rough. The quicksand one, like, almost was the scariest one for me. I shouldn't laugh because the poor guy died in the quicksand, but I have to, because I think you and I may even talk about this on Twitter once. Like, isn't quicksand like the quintessential 80s? Every 80s adventure movie has to have quicksand somewhere.
I don't know if that was us, but the first thing that started popping through my mind was the old meme about, when I was younger, I thought quicksand was going to be a much bigger problem as an adult than it actually is.
Yeah, I remember seeing a comedian who had a bit about quicksand in the 80s, and he was like, yeah, he said, it was in so many movies I became a quicksand expert. He said, I've been watching a movie being going like, nope, that's way too oatmeal-y. Nope, that's not right. But yeah, the movie has quicksand, folks, and a guy dies in it. And that's, like, to me, it's one of the most horrific ones. It's like, if only someone heard him. Like, but it does this thing that I hate in movies, but it does it because it needs to build tension. It's just like, you watch people just make bad decisions.
Yes.
Just bad decisions. Like, from the moment, like right before they even took the canoes, when they were like, oh, the rains changed, the floodplain shifted, the map doesn't match anymore. And like, what are we going to do? He's like, well, we're going to find another path, or we're going to swim through it. I'm like, no. Did you go back? You go back and say, hey, we attempted our maneuver, but it changed. Yes. We determined that was too dangerous to do over unfamiliar territory. Because we have this saying that I learned in the military. And because I've been on, like, practice maneuvers and stuff, right? So let's say I was there for real, because I've been in not exactly that situation, but similar ones where you run into something like that, and you're like, well, we could forge the river that wasn't supposed to be there, and whatever. And I learned this great saying from this major friend of mine who's like, listen, we're on a training op. And the real gung-ho people are like, yeah, we should be training for, like, if this was real. And he goes, and the major said this, I'll never forget. We don't practice bleeding. Like, why should we practice extreme hardship when it's not real? Yeah. Like, if you want the reality of it, I could shoot you in the arm and you can practice bleeding. So that was what went through my head. I was like, you don't practice bleeding. Like, okay, you went as far as you could. You ran up against an obstacle. I guess I can't help but watch this with a military lens and a leadership lens. But that's what I was thinking. Bad decisions, man. Bad decisions being made. I mean, especially after old dude, their sergeant got shot in the head.
Yeah.
I would have been like,
at that point, I would have been like, we're turning around, we're going back.
Yeah, we're heading right back. But now they were like, oh, we're just going to move on to the... What? What?
Well, and then my other my nitpicking point in this movie is that helicopter pilot isn't too observant, because it's not like that swamp is really overgrown. You should have been able to see a group of 9 guys down there waving and yelling through those dead trees.
There's an interesting, because I did explain it to myself, like, hey, that's really thick and it'd be hard to see. And they're wearing green. I'll give them that.
Must have
But
been the green.
But you're right. They filmed it, as I learned in my little behind the scenes deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
They filmed it in the wintertime.
Aha.
And that's why it wasn't as thick as it
So we
might
have a
have
predator
been.
situation here, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. That's why you can like see their breath a lot and stuff. Like
okay. Some of those night shots, yeah.
When you learn that, by the way, you get a whole new respect for it, because that's another thing Walter Hill was talking about. He was like, man, we went out to the swamp in the winter and these actors stood, crawled, fell in that cold water over.
That water had to be cold.
Over and over. He was like, they were true warriors. The crew was true warriors because there's no electricity out there. They had to bring generators. And he was talking about how they would literally set up like a camera shot for a still shot. Mm-hmm. And because the way the swamp is actually moving, like the land is sinking, the camera would move during the shot, and he'd be like, dang it, we gotta take it again. The land mass that we put our camera on literally moves.
Oh wow.
So yeah, excuse me, I have to think though, if I was gonna make a movie out in the swamps, and they filmed it in Louisiana and Texas, if I was gonna do that, I would actually prefer to do it in the winter. I would take cold water over super hot and muggy and mosquitoes.
Yeah.
And the full blown, predators are all out. Like at least in the winter, most of the predators are hidden away,
reluctant to come out.
Yes.
And as I tell some of my Boy Scouts, it's a lot easier to warm up than it is to cool down.
Yes, there you go. I firmly believe in that. All right. Do you have any other thoughts on Southern Comfort?
I got one question.
Go ahead.
Do they? I see what you think, because I'm still puzzling over this one. Do they make it out alive? Because it doesn't look like the chopper's coming in for a landing. You see that military truck coming in, but you cannot see clearly who is behind the wheel.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess I'm the eternal optimist, because I thought, okay, and it ends squarely on the star.
Yes,
the Army star on the side of the truck. I may be the eternal optimist, but I took that to mean they found their ride, they made it.
Mm-hmm.
But you bring up an interesting point. You could look at that at a 180 and just say, hey, for all we know, some Bubba's stolen Army truck.
Yeah.
And they didn't make it.
Because the first time I watched it through, I was questioning whether or not they made it. And then, because I looked, and I'm like, is that an actual Army guy in the driver's seat? And then the second time through, I sat there and I slowed it down and I watched it, and I'm thinking, okay, yep, okay, yeah, that's an Army guy in the seat. So I'm thinking they made it. I'm going to say they made it.
All right, that's two votes for they made it. But now you've brought up another topic for me to run my mouth about. And one thing that just bugged me to no end, and I guess I get that they're guard, but you don't show up for guard duty out of regs. And a lot of their haircuts were just out of regs. Like Powers Booth especially was really long. Like, no, it was not anywhere near regs. Mm-hmm. And that kind of bothered me as a military man's point of view. I just thought, well, I don't understand why, but maybe they're really trying to push it, sort of the guard, that weekend warrior. We'll be a little lax with that kind of thing. Okay. Maybe that's how it was back in the early 80s. I don't know, but it bothered me. Oh, I did think of one other thing. I'm going to spoil a moment for people who haven't seen it, but it gave me a legitimate chuckle when, I think it's just down to Powers and Carradine. And they're kind of sitting there, and they made something of a friendship. And Carradine asks Powers Booth about his wife, and he's like, how's your marriage? He's like, hey, good marriage. I really love my wife. She's got a great sense of humor. Mm-hmm. Why do you ask? He says, I'm thinking if you don't make it out, I'm going to look her up. And and the best is the reply from Carradine. He said, I said she has a great sense of humor. I thought that was a pretty clever line, because it's funny. And it shows these two guys haven't lost
it,
their humanity yet. They still have jokes in them. Both of them do. And I thought that's just good storytelling when you can put in a small moment that tells you a lot. Because like you said, Coach is catatonic. He's been walking around with a rope tied around him for 2 days now.
Yeah. He hasn't said a word, and he's just staring off into space.
Like, that was just weird. And he painted the cross on himself and blew
I'm
up.
trying to remember what he said.
Oh, he said something like, it's a corporal's joke. You wouldn't understand it's a corporal's joke. And like, no one understood. And then
somebody beforehand said something about, what was it? It's a private's joke or something. And
I get, yeah. But he
kind of flipped it around on him.
He said something about the avenging angel.
Yes.
And I was just like, okay, you still don't make any sense, bro. Like,
yeah. It didn't make any sense to me either. I'm like, am I missing something here?
I think he first kind of snaps when they're just moving in on the cabin. Because remember, he's supposed to be in the rear. He volunteers to be in the front. They said, stay in the rear. He disobeys orders, goes in there.
Charges right in.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, as a military man, like, they eventually found out that Reese, which is Fred Ward, had real ammo. He always brings real ammo just in case. So they all got like 3 shells or something like that. And they just suck at conserving ammo, man. They shoot at anything and everything. They shoot when they're scared. I'm like, dude, if you got 3 bullets, you don't shoot at anything.
You don't shoot at anything
lined up in your crosshairs.
You make sure you know what you got.
Yep.
And I didn't think about it, but I should have counted. See, all right, because towards the end there, they started popping off a lot of rounds. I'm thinking, okay, everybody had 3 bullets. Only 3 of them or 4 of them had died at this point. Did somebody take all their bullets and put them in their rifle?
Yeah, there was some where a guy shot like 8 times. I was like, where'd you get those? That's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, nitpicks. But just overall really good storytelling. I honestly, I think my down note for the movie, and I can't help but it's part of the story, but I really like Fred Ward, and for him to be out of the game so early, because he did seem like a competent soldier, like kind of had that hard edge, like he's a good knife fighter, he's a good shooter, like he brings live rounds because you never know. And I kind of was rooting for him to be able to get some of the revenge he wanted against those people, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, I figured it was going to be Carradine that bit the bullet, and then it was going to be Booth and Ward that made it through.
Mm-hmm. But I guess back in '81, Carradine was the bigger name.
Yeah, exactly.
Fred Ward was still an up and comer, I guess. But so yeah, folks, we've rattled on. I don't have a lot of lows for this film. If you like Walter Hill films, which I'm slowly realizing I really do, like he kind of entered my sphere in action film Face Off when we were talking about Warriors, and I was like, yeah, Walter Hill, Warriors, that's a good movie. It wasn't he the guy that did 48 Hours? Yeah, that's really good. And then, well, didn't he do Red Heat? Yeah, that's like, I'm like, this guy makes pretty good movies. And I'll just wrap it up and pass it to you, Chris, for any final thoughts too. Another thing I learned from Walter Hill said, for some reason, he to this day doesn't understand, like, this movie just didn't click. He's like, it made no money stateside. He said, sometimes you make a movie where it's like, okay, it doesn't make any money states, but we were big in Japan or we were big in Europe. He was like, he literally said this movie was big nowhere. Like, just nowhere. He said it was just financially did nothing. And I just think that's a real shame because it doesn't deserve that.
Yeah, it's a solid movie. I mean, there's a few little things here and there, but I mean, overall, it is a solid movie, start to finish.
I agree. You know what? Let's play a fun game real quick before we go. If you could change anything to make it more solid, what would you do? I'll give you a minute to think, because I would. It bugs me a little bit when I see movies like this, and it's very common, especially in the 70s and early 80s, is the blood is like comically red. Like it's like red paint, red blood. Like I feel like they didn't really get blood right in movies until, well, maybe right around this time with Friday the 13th and all that kind of stuff. But like it's that you see paint red blood, and then you see that sort of that Kiro syrupy, more realistic looking blood. Like I just thought the blood was, I would have changed that and made it. I think it would have made it a little more. It would have made it grimmer, a little more believable. Maybe we needed that break though from the. Maybe we needed the fakey blood just to get through. So, have you thought anything that you might change to tweak it up to make it?
I probably would have maybe wanted to see a little more interaction between the Cajuns and the
Mm,
military, the hunters and the guys, because they are kind of the hidden,
mm,
unforeseen, in the
mm.
background. You're thinking, are they trailing them the whole way? Are they chasing them down and they're
That's
just not
fair.
showing up? I would have maybe liked to have seen, you know, a little something from the flip side from their point of view.
That's fair. No, I completely agree. From that stance, it felt a lot like that aforementioned Rituals movie from 1977 starring Hal Holbrook. Like it's very psychological. You never see who's basically killing them off one by one until
Mhm.
the very, very end. And then you barely see anything of it. So it has that vibe for sure.
Yeah. And it wouldn't even have to be anything big. I mean, it could maybe be some scenes of them at night, getting ready for the next day,
Just
or when
watching
they're out
them.
handling the dogs, maybe not so much and to keep with the psychological part of it, you don't show their faces. It's all close-ups of them sharpening knives,
Mm.
readying bows or rifles, feeding the dogs raw meat, or whatever. Little things like
Oh
that.
yeah. I
Kind of
think
keeping them still the somewhat unseen terror out there, but
yeah.
just
I
a
think
little something from their point of view.
it would have been definitely cool to see like the guys at night sort of in their encampment and then like an over the shoulder just silhouetted shot of someone watching them like way
Yeah,
closer than you
yeah.
would think, like literally 12 feet away and they don't
Mhm.
even know he's there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That would have
Ooh,
been like
yes,
that would have been like
yes.
what type of a deal. Oh, anyways, we've gone on and on, and that's a good thing because I think Southern Comfort is a fine, fine film. If you like Walter Hill films, which I'm rapidly discovering I do, if you enjoyed movies like Deliverance or Rituals, you will definitely enjoy Southern
Mhm.
Comfort. It is very tense, psychological, a little bit gory in spots, but it's mostly a psychological thriller. And if that's your cup of tea, then I have to recommend Southern Comfort. And I thank Chris for bringing it to new to me. With that, Chris, if people want to talk more with you, like I do, on Twitter or any other place, go ahead and pimp yourself.
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Blackbelt X21. I'm the guy talking movies, TV shows, 60s, 70s, 80s. That's my mainstay, and I'm slowly becoming a very big fan of chips for some reason.
California Highway Patrol.
Yeah, I for some reason I think that's the one show I tweet about the most, and both my wife and my son can't stand it because my son will regularly come downstairs. He goes, "Really? You're watching Chips again?"
Give me your Twitter handle one more time.
Black Belt X21.
There you go.
So
Black Belt
two
X21.
one.
He is a great follow on Twitter, especially if you like this kind of stuff. I learn about a lot of B movies that's kind of my wheelhouse from like we basically feed each other.
Yes.
If I'm tweeting about something super obscure, I tag him. If he's tweeting about something super obscure, he tags me. Get in on this, folks. I mean, and like you said, the wheelhouse for him and me both is really 70s, 80s, and into some 90s stuff. I don't know if you saw Chris, but I recently watched what was it called? Street Justice. It starred Mark Singer, Tiny Zeus Lister.
Oh, yes, I did.
It's from 1996. It's everything you want it to be. I'm telling you right now. Listen, at one point, Mark and Tiny team up with this like super badass prostitute girl to make this trio, and it's so much fun to watch.
No, wait, Tiny Lister, Tiny Lister. He's
From
the big dude from Friday,
Friday.
right?
Yep, that's
Oh,
him.
okay.
Yeah, it's enjoy yourself. Anyway, maybe I'll do that for the next one, folks. Be on the lookout. I am at Yard Sale Artist on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I mainly do this new to me thing on Twitter. That's where I have the most amount of followers and interactions. But hey, you can always find me at Yard Sale Artist, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you're interested in checking out my art wares, you can go to www.theyardsaleartist.com. And of course, I recommend the Longbox Crusade Podcast Network. You can catch it right here. It's the channel you're watching right now on YouTube. So if you don't mind, maybe give us a like, maybe a little subscribe. We'll be doing some more of these in the future. So if you really want to get involved, put some ideas, suggestions in the comments. You never know. I might grab one of yours and bring you on the show like I did to Chris for another episode of New to Me. So that's it from Yard Sale Artists and Longbox Crusade headquarters. Thanks again for being here, Chris.
Oh, my pleasure.
We'll catch you guys later. And hey, stay out of them swamps where you don't belong. Later, everybody.